The day my COO called me into his office, I already knew something was off. Not because I'm psychic, not because I'd heard rumors through the grapevine, but because in 23 years at Harfield Logistics, I had learned to read the building the way a sailor reads weather. The fluorescent hum in the hallway seemed different that morning. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that happens when people already know something you don't. My name is Frank Calloway. I was 51 years old and I had spent more than half my life building something that didn't have my name on it. That's the thing nobody tells you when you're 28 and hungry and someone hands you a shot at a real career. You pour yourself into it, you show up early and leave late. You miss your kids' baseball games and your wife's birthday dinners, and you tell yourself it's temporary. Just until we get through this quarter. Just until the contract closes. Just until. And then one day you look up and 23 years have gone by and the company is worth $400 million. And somewhere buried in your home office is a contract that nobody at the executive level has thought about in over a decade. That contract was the only reason I kept my composure when my COO, a man I'll call my boss, because that's all he ever really was to me, slid a manila envelope across his desk and said, "We're restructuring the operations division. Your position has been eliminated." He didn't look me in the eye when he said it. I noticed that. I picked up the envelope. Inside was a termination letter, a severance offer for 8 weeks, and a non-disparagement agreement they wanted signed by end of business Friday. 8 weeks. 23 years. You do that math and tell me how it feels. I set the envelope back down on his desk, slowly. I straightened it so the edges were parallel to the corner of the desk. I don't know why I did that. Force of habit, maybe. I'd spent my whole career making sure things lined up. "Is this because of the Centurion account?" I asked. My boss shifted in his chair. "This is a business decision, Frank. It's not personal." "The Centurion account," I said again. Not a question this time. He didn't answer. He started talking about the future of the company, about modernizing operations, about bringing in a third-party logistics firm out of Atlanta that could handle our Midwest distribution at lower overhead. Words came out of his mouth and I heard them the way you hear an engine running in another room. Present but distant. I stood up. I buttoned my jacket. I said, "I'll be in touch." And I left. I drove home on I-90 doing exactly 62 miles per hour. Not because I was calm, because if I went any faster, I was afraid of what I might do. My hands were steady on the wheel, but my chest felt like something was collapsing inside it. Slow and inevitable, the way a building comes down in a controlled demolition. 23 years. I pulled into my driveway and sat in the car for a while. The garage door was up, and I could see my wife's car, which meant she was home early. I wasn't ready to say the words out loud yet. Saying them out loud would make them real, and I needed a few more minutes where they weren't. My wife came to the door of the garage and looked at me sitting in the car. She didn't say anything. She just stood there, and something in my face must have told her because she went back inside and I heard the coffee maker start. I went in through the garage. She handed me a mug and sat across from me at the kitchen table, and I told her everything. She listened without interrupting, which is one of the 10,000 things I love about her. When I was done, she said, "What are you going to do?" And I said, "I need to find a box." The box was in my home office, in the back of the closet behind a broken treadmill and 3 years of tax documents. It was a standard banker's box, the kind with the lid that fits over the top, and it had been sitting there since the year I moved my office home when the kids were small and we couldn't afford a separate space. I'd carried it through 2 house moves. I couldn't have told you exactly what was in it, but I knew the general shape of it the way you know the contents of a drawer you've never fully emptied. I cleared a space on the floor and sat down cross-legged and started going through it. Old performance reviews, a letter of commendation from a general I'd worked with briefly when the company still had some government contracts in the early 2000s, business cards from people who were probably retired or dead, a laminated safety certification from a warehouse I hadn't visited in 15 years, and then near the bottom in a clear plastic sleeve, a document I had not thought about in 11 years, the Centurion Independent Contractor Agreement. I sat there for a long moment just holding it. Here is what you need to understand about Centurion, because this is the part where the story stops being about hurt feelings and starts being about something else entirely. In 2009, Harfield Logistics was not doing well. The recession had gutted our mid-tier retail contracts, and the executive team was scrambling. I was director of operations at the time, and I'd spent the better part of 2 years quietly building a relationship with Centurion Federal Supply Group, a government procurement contractor based in Virginia that was looking for a reliable Midwest logistics partner for a long-term Department of Defense supply chain contract. The problem was that Centurion's legal team was old-fashioned. They didn't contract with corporations on this particular type of deal. Their procurement officer, a careful, methodical man who'd been doing this since the Reagan administration, insisted on a named individual as the primary contractor of record, something about accountability structures on federal supply chains. It was unusual but not unprecedented in that era of DoD procurement. My boss at the time, who was then our VP of Business Development, didn't want to deal with the paperwork complications. He told me to just sign it personally, that Harfield would be the operational entity behind me, and that we'd sort out the corporate restructuring later. We never sorted it out. I signed the Centurion Master Services Agreement as Frank Calloway, individual contractor, with Harfield Logistics named as my designated operating partner. The contract had a renewal clause. Every 5 years, it required an affirmative signature from the named contractor of record, me, to remain in force. Harfield's legal department had been sending me the renewal paperwork every 5 years, and I'd been signing it without much thought, because the account was running smoothly and nobody had flagged any issues. I had signed the most recent renewal 14 months ago. The Centurion account was worth, at that point, approximately $40 million annually in logistics fees. It was Harfield's single largest account. It represented, depending on the quarter, somewhere between 35 and 42% of total company revenue. I sat on the floor of my home office and read the agreement 3 times. Then I read the termination clause. Then I called my brother-in-law, who was a contract attorney in Columbus. He drove down that weekend. We sat at my kitchen table with the documents spread out between us and 2 pots of coffee, and he read everything twice, slowly, in the way that lawyers read things when they're being careful not to miss something. When he was done, he looked up at me and said, "Frank, do you understand what this says?" I said I thought I did. He said, "The contract is yours, not Harfield's. Yours. Harfield is listed as your operating partner, not as the contracting entity. If you withdraw as contractor of record, the agreement terminates. Harfield has no standing to continue servicing the Centurion account without your signature." I asked him if that was actually enforceable. He said, "I need to do some research on the renewal history and the federal procurement guidelines, but yeah, Frank, I think it is." He spent 3 weeks researching. He brought in a colleague who specialized in federal contracting law. They found no ambiguity. The contract was structured exactly as written. It had been renewed exactly as written. I was the contractor of record, and I had the right to withdraw. The question was what to do with that information. I want to be honest about something, because I think this is the part where people assume I had some elaborate plan from the beginning. I didn't. The first 3 weeks after I was let go, I was just lost. I spent a lot of time in the backyard with my dog, a 7-year-old shepherd mix named Biscuit, who is genuinely the most emotionally perceptive creature I've ever met. He'd lay his head on my knee and look at me like he understood exactly what was happening, which was more than most people managed. My wife went back to her job at the school district. My oldest called from Portland and told me this was an opportunity. My youngest, who is 20 and therefore knows everything, sent me a list of LinkedIn tips. I sent out some resumes. I had phone screens. I was, by every external measure, moving on. But I kept coming back to that contract. Not out of revenge, exactly. I want to be clear about that. Because revenge sounds petty and what I felt wasn't petty. What I felt was a very specific, very quiet anger at the fundamental dishonesty of what had been done. 23 years, 8 weeks severance, a non-disparagement agreement they wanted signed by Friday. And somewhere in an office in Chicago, my former boss was already in meetings with the Atlanta logistics firm, planning the transition. Nobody had told Centurion yet. Nobody had thought to check whether there was anything standing between Harfield and a seamless handoff of their biggest account. Nobody had thought about the box in my closet. My brother-in-law sent a formal letter to Centurion's procurement office on a Thursday morning. It was polite, precise, and about 4 paragraphs long. It explained that Frank Calloway, contractor of record for the Master Services Agreement dated March 2009 and renewed most recently in February of the prior year, was withdrawing from the contract effective 60 days from the date of the letter, in accordance with Section 14(b) of the agreement. He copied me on it. He did not copy Harfield. I know exactly what happened on the Harfield side because a former colleague of mine, a woman who'd been my assistant for 11 years and who was not included in the restructuring, told me later. She said the call came in from Centurion's procurement office at around 2 in the afternoon. She said the VP of Business Development, who had taken over my accounts after my departure, went completely white. She said he asked Centurion to hold and then walked into my former boss's office and closed the door. She said the door stayed closed for 45 minutes. My phone rang at 4:37 that afternoon. It was my former boss. I let it go to voicemail. He called again at 5:30. Voicemail. He called again at 5:32. Voicemail. He called from his cell phone at 5:19. Voicemail. There were 11 calls that evening. I listened to the first voicemail before I went to bed. He said there had been a miscommunication regarding my departure, and that he'd like to schedule a call at my earliest convenience to discuss options. His voice was very controlled in the way that voices get when someone is working very hard to sound calm. I slept better that night than I had in weeks. My brother-in-law handled the negotiations. I want to emphasize that I was not the one making demands. I was simply a private citizen who had sent a legally appropriate notice regarding a contract that bore my name. What Harfield chose to do in response to that notice was entirely up to them. What they chose to do was panic. Within 48 hours, I had been contacted by 3 different people from Harfield's executive team, including their general counsel, who I had met exactly once at a company holiday party and who now very much wanted to have a conversation. My brother-in-law fielded all of it. He was polite and professional and absolutely unmovable. Harfield's first offer was my old salary reinstated with a 1-year contract. My brother-in-law responded that we weren't there yet. Their second offer was my salary, a 3-year retention contract, and restoration of my previous title. My brother-in-law said we were getting closer. Their third offer was my salary, a 5-year contract, the title of Chief Operations Officer, which was a step above where I'd been, a seat on the Executive Advisory Board, and a retroactive severance payment for the weeks I'd been out, calculated at COO level compensation. My brother-in-law brought me that offer on a Sunday afternoon, and we sat on my back porch and he laid out the terms and asked me what I wanted to do. I looked out at the yard. Biscuit was doing his slow patrol of the fence line, nose to the ground, completely absorbed in whatever story the grass was telling him. "What happens to the Centurion contract if I sign?" I asked. My brother-in-law said the withdrawal letter would be rescinded, the account would continue under the same terms, and a revised agreement would be drafted to properly incorporate Harfield as co-contractor going forward. And if I don't sign, 60 days and Centurion terminates the relationship with Harfield. They've already told us they're prepared to contract with you directly or to find another logistics partner. They're not particularly interested in whatever transition plan Harfield is building. I thought about that. $40 million a year. 35 to 42% of revenue. The Atlanta firm that was supposed to modernize operations. The 8-week severance they thought was enough. What would I need to set up independently? I asked. We talked for another 2 hours. The short answer was, less than they thought. I want to be careful here, because the version of this story that feels satisfying is the one where I walk away and build an empire and watch Harfield crumble. That's the movie version. Real life is messier and more ambiguous and, I think, ultimately more interesting. Here's what actually happened. I signed with Centurion directly. My brother-in-law helped me establish a proper LLC. And we spent 30 days building out a lean operations team. I called 3 people I had worked with over the years, people who knew the Centurion account, who understood federal logistics requirements, who I would trust with my professional life. All 3 of them came on board within 2 weeks. One of them had been laid off in the same restructuring that took me out. Another had left Harfield voluntarily 6 months earlier when things started feeling unstable. We were operational before the 60-day window closed. Harfield made 2 more attempts to negotiate during that period. Their general counsel sent a letter suggesting that my original employment agreement contained provisions that might complicate my ability to operate independently in the logistics space. My brother-in-law read it carefully and then wrote back a very measured response noting that non-compete clauses in Illinois are substantially limited under recent state law, and that we were happy to have that conversation in court if they preferred. They did not prefer. On the 61st day, the Centurion account formally transferred. Harfield lost their largest client. The Atlanta firm, it turned out, did not have the federal contracting experience to fill that gap quickly. I heard later from my former colleague, the one who'd been my assistant, that there were significant layoffs in the following quarter. I'm not going to tell you I felt nothing about that. Some of those people were my friends. Some of them had given years to that company the same way I had. The layoffs were not my doing, but they were downstream of decisions that I was part of, and I carry that. What I won't do is pretend that my former boss deserved something different than what happened. He made a calculation. He decided that 23 years of contribution could be handled with 8 weeks of severance and a manila envelope pushed across a desk without eye contact. He was wrong about that calculation. My company is 18 months old now. We have 7 full-time employees, 3 part-time, and 2 contracts beyond Centurion that we picked up in the last year. My wife says I work fewer hours than I did at Harfield, which is true. I coach my neighbor's kids' little league team on Saturday mornings. Biscuit has developed an opinion about the mailman that I am choosing not to address. A former colleague texted me a few months ago to say that my former boss had left the company. Mutual decision, the internal announcement had said, which is a phrase that means exactly nothing and everyone knows it. I didn't respond to the text. I read it, I put my phone down, and I went back to the proposal I was working on for a new distribution center client in Indiana. The work was interesting. The problem was solvable. That was enough. My brother-in-law came to our company's 1-year anniversary dinner. At some point during the evening, he leaned over and said, "You know what I keep thinking about? He probably forgot about that contract the same day he signed your termination letter." I said, "Probably." He said he thought he was letting go of an employee. He didn't realize he was releasing someone who'd been holding everything together. I've thought about that a lot since then, not with satisfaction exactly. More with a kind of clarity about how things work, about how institutions take people for granted until they can't anymore, about how the most dangerous person in any organization isn't the one making noise. It's the one who's been quietly keeping everything running for so long that nobody remembers what it looked like before they arrived. I'm not a dramatic person. I'm not someone who enjoys conflict or who wanted to blow anything up. I wanted to do good work and be treated fairly. When the second part stopped being true, I found out I still had the first part, and it turned out the first part was more portable than anyone had anticipated. My wife asked me once, about 6 months in, if I had any regrets. I thought about it honestly, the way she deserved. "I regret that it took this to figure out what I actually had," I said. She said, "Most people never figure it out at all." Biscuit came over and put his head on my knee, which seemed like the right punctuation. "There's one more thing I want to say, and then I'm done. If you're sitting somewhere right now reading this or listening to this, and you've given a significant portion of your working life to an organization that sees you as a line item, I'm not going to tell you to burn it down. I'm not going to tell you to go find your leverage and pull it. Most situations don't have a contract in a closet. Most situations don't resolve the way this one did. But I will tell you this, know what you've built, know what you actually own, know what exists because of you and what would disappear if you disappeared. Not as a weapon, not as leverage, just as information. Because the thing about 23 years of work is that it goes somewhere. It doesn't evaporate. It's in the systems and the relationships and the institutional knowledge, and sometimes, if you're lucky and if the paperwork was done sloppily enough back in 2009, it's in a contract in a box in the back of your closet. Know what's in your box, that's all I've got. I've been asked a few times since all of this happened whether I think my former boss got what he deserved. It's a fair question, and I've tried to answer it honestly every time. Here's what I actually believe: he got what his decisions produced. That's not the same thing as deserving. It's more mechanical than that, and less satisfying, and also more true. When he slid that envelope across the desk without making eye contact, he wasn't making a judgment about my worth. He was making an assumption about his own position. That he had accounted for everything. That he understood the full weight of what he was moving. He hadn't. He assumed that 23 years of work could be cleanly separated from the company the way you'd unplug a lamp. He didn't consider that some of what I'd built was load-bearing. That assumption had consequences, not because the universe punished him for being callous. I don't think it works that way. But because assumptions that are wrong tend to collide with reality eventually, and the collision is proportional to how wrong the assumption was. His was very wrong. The collision was significant. What I keep coming back to is not the outcome but the principle underneath it. There's a kind of intelligence that organizations consistently undervalue, and it's not the flashy kind. It's not the person who comes in with a presentation full of projections and a new vocabulary for old problems. It's the person who has been there long enough to understand why things were built the way they were, who holds the institutional memory, who knows which decisions from 15 years ago are still quietly shaping the present. That knowledge is almost invisible until it's gone, and then it's the only thing anyone can see. I spent 23 years building that kind of intelligence into Harfield's operations, not because I was trying to protect myself. I was just doing the work. The contract in my closet wasn't a strategy. It was an artifact of a messy workaround from 2009 that nobody ever cleaned up. I didn't manufacture my leverage, I just didn't throw it away. That's the thing I'd want anyone in a similar position to take from this. Not find your leverage and hold it over people's heads. That's not it. The real thing is simpler. Know what you've actually contributed. Not for ego, not as ammunition, just as information. Understand what exists because of you. Understand the value of your own institutional knowledge, your relationships, your judgment, the systems that run quietly because you built them right the first time. Because the day someone decides you're a line item, you need to know whether that's actually true. In my case, it wasn't. My former boss thought he was letting go of a salary. He didn't realize he was releasing the person the whole account structure depended on. That's not on me. That's on 23 years of quiet competence being mistaken for furniture. My wife said something a few months and that I think about more than almost anything else she's ever said to me. And she said some very good things. She said the hard part isn't losing the job. The hard part is figuring out which parts of yourself you left inside it. I've been working on that question ever since. The answer, I think, is less than I feared. Most of what matters traveled with me. Biscuit figured that out before I did. He wasn't worried about the org chart. He was just glad I was home,